So if you saw the last clip, you saw that we started with a Warhammer action figure, the Artist Proof. And thanks to Mcfarlane, we got something really cool out of this Artist Proof. And there's a lot that can be done with these Artist Proofs because the potential is just, well, the possibilities are endless. It depends on your imagination. This is where we left off in the last video, showing you a preview of the work in progress for Mr. Freeze. Well, this segment will take you through a process of that. I'm not going to show you the whole thing in this video because it is just extremely long. There's so many details to this figure. So let's start by giving a little refresher course on taking apart the figure. Now I've sped up the camera to show you quickly what was done. If you want to see it in more detail, you can revert to the prior video to see it slowed down. Basically, we removed that chest plate with the eagle. We also removed the head, removed the pauldrons. Of course, we already heated up the figure so that it makes it easier to remove. And keep track of those pins, so you may want to reuse those pauldrons or save them to attach a portrait onto your figure. We're using the Punisher portrait that we've already shaved down. Now this type of material takes paint really well, whether it's acrylic ink or acrylic paint. In this case I chose acrylic ink just to give it a try, and it works pretty well. And I used it to do the shading first and then paint over it with the actual color. That way I don't have to go back and redo my shading. I started first by applying it to all of the joints with the airbrush. Now you can also, of course, do this with a hand brush. I didn't do any masking here because I wanted the overspray to be that wash of, of wear and tear. So I just was very careful because you can do that with an airbrush. You can control the pressure and the amount of ink that comes out by controlling the double action on the trigger. I did paint the joints. However, I wasn't too happy with the ink as it does come off easy, and I was hoping that it would actually stain the plastic that much better. In any case, I ended up sealing it so that it does not rub off as easily. However, it is one of those Mcfarlane pieces, so it does have ratchets on the joints, and no matter what you do to paint it to keep it from scratching, those ratchets will eventually remove some of that paint. So you just have to be careful how you're going to display it. I went ahead and painted the inside as well, since it's going to be in shadow. I don't want to have the eye drawn to those unpainted areas once it's posed. So we got a long way to go. I did this not only to the legs, but I also did that to the joints on the elbows. And then as you can see here, I proceeded to add my shading where I would want to show some of that wear and tear. Later, toward the end, we'll come back and add some more wear and tear details to the actual metal. For now, we are just doing the shading to start off the figure. There is no primer that I added because this plastic is already gray and it takes the paint really well. This black ink stains pretty well. It does not come off easily. I would actually have to sand it off or use an acetone to remove it. So that was a great, a characteristic of this ink. However, like I said, I wasn't too happy that on the joints it was still able to rub off by manipulating those joints. But let's go on. So as you can see, I also applied it to the elbows, and very carefully, once again, there's no need to mask. You control that airbrush and you are able to get into those areas and leave the overspray. It looks actually really good once you paint the actual color on the rest of the figure. Continue to apply as many layers as you see necessary to achieve the look that you want. However, keep in mind that it's layers. Do not do it all in one pass. That may occur in causing dripping, and you're going to cause another problem to then clean up that situation. So it's best to take it slow, go in layers, and there achieving the control of the desired look you want to end up with. The same thing with the hands. They are small, so control the airbrush to only spray the amount needed that you need. Do not overpaint, because then it will be taking a longer time to dry, and it's difficult to manipulate a small piece, even if you're using the forceps. So I do recommend that you use a hair dryer to quickly dry it and continue on to the next, or continue with the next layer of paint that you may want to use. Again, I'm not masking the hand. I am only using the overspray to go on the edges to show some of that wear and tear. That is why you don't see any masking. Do not paint the joints, because they will give you trouble when you later pose those pieces. It will make the joints that much tighter, and it will then cause that chipping typically. On the joints here, because they are fitting inside the sleeve, they will be hidden, so it's not much of an issue there. So moving on to the trunks, you can see I have already removed the belt, and that was really difficult because it was well glued on. You can see all the glue spots that are there. I've already sanded it down as best as possible. Again, using the same ink, and this is an acrylic ink. It is Liquitex, that is the brand, and it is a good brand as far as airbrushing, because it's a permanent, at least it is on paper. However, on this plastic, it's not absorbing as well, but it does have a good coverage. Just a few drops of this goes a long way. So let's continue on, because we want to complete this process. There's a lot of detail that went into this figure. I myself was unaware of how much detail I ended up putting into this. So once again, control the amount of air that comes out by pushing down on the trigger and pulling back on the trigger, and then you can control the amount of ink that is dispersed through the end of the airbrush. Because you are using the airbrush, it will dry that much quicker, and you'll get a nice uniform coverage. I prefer to use the airbrush when possible, but there are times that you have to use the actual bristle brush to get into other finer details. So now, working on the lower part of the torso, or the abdominal area, we're doing the same thing. No masking, just controlling the amount of ink. And I believe I applied like 2 or 3 layers on this, just by letting the first layer dry and then coming back and working the other. And then go with the contour, don't go against it. That way you can create natural shading when coming up to the edges. Painting something like this is something that requires a bit of planning, and this is one of those stages where you want to predetermine where you want those shadows or the shading to be on this particular piece of armor. If you're going for the Warhammer traditional look, then you can pre-plan your weathering before, because that'll make it easier in finalizing those detail areas in the end of your product. In this case, the painting that we're going to do is going to overlay onto those shadows, and that way it'll look like we use different shades of color instead of one single color. In this case, we're only going to use 2, the shading, which is this black, and then of course the actual tone on the metal and other areas of the figure. Now you'll see later what colors I used, and my inspiration was a lot of the drawings that are from the Batman animated, just because I love the series and I really like the Mr. Freeze in that series. So this is the nice thing about taking the entire piece apart. You can get into those areas that would be very difficult. And by using an airbrush in here, we're able to lay in that color nice and even. And of course, once you're done painting it, then you want to seal it. And I did order a bottle of Mr. Clear, the Super Clear. I have not used it yet. I am still using the Model Masters satin or flat the semi-glossy and the matte finish clear gloss. In this case, I used the matte finish. And I also painted the collar area. By the way, that is removable. I didn't show that in the last video, but you can remove it. A little bit of heat and then a larger flat head screwdriver underneath it and pop it off. And that will make it easier to complete the rest of the process. I'll show you that in the later part of the video as to the lighting that was added to the helmet area. Now I have a helmet on order, I should say an acrylic sphere that I ordered that I'll be turning into a helmet. And once that is here, then I'll complete the rest of the video segments to share with you. For the moment, I'm going to show you how to get to that point of the first clip that you saw earlier. Now, right now, this ink is sticky. So for me to manipulate it, I have to not only air dry it, but use a hair dryer to quickly dry it and then spray it down with the clear coat so I can actually manipulate it. Right now, I can actually scratch it because there's nothing protecting that ink and it's still fresh. So don't think just because you've hairbrushed it or painted it that it's fully dry and it's stuck on for good. It typically is not that way, and that's going to depend on the paint that you use. So right now, it is not a workable piece. It's still drying. I left it drying at least overnight so as to make sure that paint is fully dry. So here is the torso, and I've already sprayed down the legs in this color, which is a turquoise mixed in with a silver metallic. And I want that metal look on as much of the armor as possible. Now I don't want it to look like a Warhammer piece. I'm only using the base. That's why I removed the pauldrons, and I removed the helmet, and I removed the eagle. Mr. Freeze doesn't have an eagle. But I do love the turquoise color that has the look on this metal. It really has a characteristic of the comics, or at least in my perspective, the Batman animated, which is what I was very fond of. So in any case, let's move on. Once again, thin layers, even layers. So if you have to apply 4 or 5 or 6 layers, not a problem. It's not a race. Do the best you can to cover those areas. Now if that overspray gets inside, don't worry. Nobody's going to see it. It's going to be within behind the shoulders. But if it's up to you if it really bothers you, you can go back in and paint those again. At this point, I still have not sprayed it with a matte finish because I'm still working on the color of the armor, and I want this same color to be the same as on the legs. So as you can tell, the color that we're painting onto this armor, and wherever there's some of that black overspray, you can tell that the black is overpowering the layer that we're applying on top. It's showing up as a shadow, which looks really good. So I was really happy that worked out the way I planned it. Now once in a while your airbrush is going to get clogged up because acrylics tend to dry. So make sure you clean it before you go on to the next one. Now when painting the hand, again, no masking, just controlling the trigger on the airbrush. And I'm applying a purple mixed in with a metallic paint. So you have metallic purple. I don't have fancy names. I mix my own colors, so I don't go off the fancy names that are on the bottles. So here we go. I've already applied 2 layers. I'm going on to the next one. And just so you see it fresh from the start, we're going in and applying a thin coat. Then we're coming back and applying another. And it looks like it was a little bit clogged up, so I had to flush it out by pulling back more on the trigger. In any case, those little spots will be covered up when I go back for a second and third layer. So get into the finger areas as best as possible, on the thumb, on the palm, depending on the color you're using. I'm using black and purple. And again, this is a purple mixed in with a metallic silver. We're going with that same purple onto the legs, onto the thighs, and just this area will have the metallic purple. I've already masked off the rest. I don't want to paint the rest of it in this color. I want it to stay in that aqua blue or aqua green, whichever way you look at it, so that there's a contrast of color. And this is the way the purple looks now on the armor that's there. It looks so cool. So going with the lower part of the armor on the leg, I went with a different tone. And this time I mixed in a dark blue with a black and again the silver. So I wanted to have that metallic look. As you can see, the sculpting already has some texture to it. So we want to use that in our favor, and of course we'll go back later and add some details to those augmented details that are already there. So you can already tell the color here looks so different than what it was before. It's still, it's kind of a gunmetal, but it's in a blue tone. And so I guess it's not gunmetal, it's just a blue tone. But it looks so much different. So only applying it to the areas that need to have it. Again, I'm going in different layers. The first layer does not cover everything. The second layer will then cover the areas that are left. And then a third layer will give it a uniform look. So I still have some of the color left in the color cup, and I want to go ahead and use it. I just don't want to drain it all out. And I'm just going to use it to add some colored shading in the areas that would be underneath, as if the light was coming from the top. So that way we have some natural color shading, and it's going to make it easier in the very end when we add details with the brush. These little vent pockets, I'll add some color there. That way there's a variation. It just depends on what you want to have in a final product. So you almost have to think ahead what you want it to look like. I'll add some color here to show some sheen. And in the end I ended up changing it just because I did something totally different with it because I was trying something. Again, this is a custom. There's a lot of things here that I ended up changing as I did it, simply because I had ideas that occurred to me at the time, and I said, well, let's try it because I won't know if I don't try it. So whatever leftover paint you have, go ahead and use it and just give it a few more layers of paint. It's not going to hurt. It's best to use it instead of throwing away the paint that you mixed up, unless you want to save it and give it a name like most people. I just use it. So I'm going to leave you with a segment for now, and then we'll continue on in the next video with the other portion of this custom figure, Mr. Freeze. In the meantime, please like, comment, and subscribe if you like the video. And of course, most important, don't forget to keep customizing. We'll see you in the next segment of this project.